Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing well. So in this video we will go over lab 4B. Now up until this point, like all the content that we've covered from unit 1 to unit 4 will be part of your midterm exam. And the most important topic for your exam is unit 4. If you study nothing for the exam, if you prepare nothing, at least study unit 4, which is both the parts 4A and 4B. Extremely important in terms of labs, in terms of summary quizzes, in terms of slides. Majority of the heavy questions or the difficult questions will come from this unit. So make sure that you practice it, as many times as you can, and also try to work on the practice exam or the practice quiz that I created for midterm, so that you are, prepared to be able to solve all of those questions that are given to you within 75 minutes. Okay, so with that said, let's start with the lab. This lab has a few questions that are tricky and that require some logic and some math. But once you practice those questions many times, multiple times, you will be able to solve any kind of questions that are similar to the concept. So again, I'm reiterating it, but this lab is the most important lab for your midterm. Anyway, so let's start with the first question. In the first question here, some code is given to you. It's not fully complete. You have to add a few things, and they are listed here in the question. So it says dissect and investigate the code provided below. Line 5 has a static scanner object. So on line 5, you have a static object, which basically this is a class level variable or class level object. What this allows you to do is you can create it once, but then you can use it multiple times in other methods without having the need to create it again. So for example, you've created it here, but then it's being used in the method read number. The method read number is using the scanner object input. And if you notice, within the method, we're not creating input. What happens here is it considers the input to be this static or class level object. So again, a concept that you should know. Then the second thing is method main is basically 3 lines of code, and the first 2 lines declare 2 integer variables. The third line calls a method named add, passing 2 parameters. So 2 integer variables are created, and then you're calling a method add. But if you notice, the method add is not created. The only thing that's mentioned here is the call. So you need to create the method here. So, and then there's a method read number, which basically prompts the user to enter a number, and the number entered by the user is read and returned by the method. So you're reading the input from the user, which is a number, and because it's int, the return type of this method is int, and from this method a value is being returned. Okay, so now what do we need to do? Your task is basically to call the method read number twice and store the returned value in num1 and num2. So in num1 and num2, you need to store the values that are returned by read number. So you can write it something like this: equal to read number equal to read number. So it goes, when this line is being executed, what happens is it goes to this method read number, prompts the user, reads the input from the user, and returns that input. And let's say the number that the user gave you was 7. So that number 7 is then being stored in num1. The same process repeats for num2. Now the second task is write a method named add. So the name of the method is add, and it takes two integer parameters. Okay, now whenever you notice the word takes, or whenever you notice the word parameters, that refers to the list of parameters that are written for the method. So let's go step by step. The first thing that they want you to do is create a method add. So if you were to create it normally, like you create the main method, you would write public static void. Instead of the word main, here the name of the method is add, and then two brackets because this is a method, and the curly brackets for the body of the method. Now the next part says it takes two integer variables as parameters. So parameters are always written within these two round brackets or parentheses, and they want two integer variables, so you will create, two integer parameters, so you will write two integer variables in this in these brackets. So int, you can name it whatever you want, so int num1, let's say, comma int num2. This is the list of parameters. It is integer, both of them, and the name is num1 and num2. Please remember, you can never do this. Don't do this for now, okay? Just whenever you create the parameters, you have to write the data type and the name of the parameter. Okay, so with that, let's see what's next. It should print the sum of the two numbers as shown in the example. So the number that are provided, you need to print the sum for those two numbers. So these two integer variables that, or parameters that are provided, you need to print the sum of those two numbers. Now it would look something like this. For example, int sum is equal to num1 plus num2, and then finally system.out.println sum is, which you can paste it here, remove the number and add your variable. So this will print, this line will calculate the sum and store it in the sum variable, and this statement will print that the value of the sum variable. The next thing is write a method named subtract that takes two integer variables as parameters and prints the difference. Very similar to what we just did. It would be public static void subtract, and it also takes two parameters, so int num1, int num2, and then finally int difference is equal to num1 minus num2, and then system.out.println, can copy this. I recommend that any of these results that you need to print, even in your exam, make sure that you copy them, because if you type them and you make a mistake, it will cost you a lot of time fixing those issues. Okay, so that's this the subtract method. And finally, write a method multiply that takes two integer variables, the same thing, and prints the product. Product is when you multiply two numbers. So it's the same thing. What you can do is even copy it and then just change the name to multiply. This will be product num1 times num2. Product is, and this one is product. And then what's next? Finally, call the method subtract and multiply at the end of the main method. So this is the main method here. If you click right next to the curly brackets, it will show you where it's ending. So this method is ending on line 16. Just before the end of the main method, you need to call subtract. And because the subtract method has two parameters, you can't just call it like this. This will be wrong, because you're saying that there are, when you have empty brackets, that means there is no parameter that is required. But if you look at the definition of the method, it requires two integer parameters. So for that, you need to send the what is it called, the value or the variable that has a value. So num1 and num2, num1 comma num2. Why comma? Because here there's a comma, that's why. Okay, and then similarly multiply num1 comma num2. Okay, now if you check, it should work. Okay, now if you notice, if you take a look at the numbers, the calculation is correct. It's just how it is being printed that is not correct. So for example, enter a number, sum is, all of it is on the same line, whereas in the expected column, all of it is on different lines. So let's take a look at where enter a number is being printed. It's printed here, enter a number. The problem is we're using print here. It should be print ln. When you just use print here instead of print ln, what it does, it starts printing everything on the same line, and so your output will be different if you look at what is in the expected column. So if you now check, I hope it works. Okay, perfect. So with that, the first question is done. Now this kind of questions will show up in your exam. This is the format of what kind of questions will be there. For example, you have 4 questions that you need to code in your midterm, right? Out of those 4, 3 questions will ask you to create a method. This is why I mentioned that Unit 4 is very important, because if you don't know how to create a method, you will not be able to code for those 3 questions. So yeah, just for your information. So the question here says, write a Java method called print descending order that takes 3 integers as parameters. Now, some of the code here is given to you already. In the exam, you'll have to write the code from scratch, except for one question. But anyway, now the question here says that you need to take 3 integer parameters. Now the list of parameters, like I've mentioned before, goes within the round brackets of the method, and it needs 3 integer parameters. So int num1, int num2, int num3. Okay, now that is done. You have 3 integer parameters. Now remember, all of them are separated by a comma. Now within the method, what are we supposed to do? It says the method should display the values in descending order from the largest to the smallest, and you are already given a method called print that you can use to print the values shown in the result. Now you're given 3 integer variables. All of them will have some kind of value, some value. Your job is to print those 3 values in descending order from the largest to the smallest. For example, if you were given 1, 2, 3, you should have printed 3, 2, 1. Now how to do that? It is a little tricky, but if you follow along, it will make sense. Okay, now this method is used for printing. Anytime you want to print the values, you will use this method print, and you will send it the largest value as value 1, the second largest value as value 2, and the third largest value as value 3. Okay, or the smallest one will be the value 3, so that it can print it in this order. So in order to solve this question, the easiest way is to have 3 assumptions. Okay, the first assumption will be num1 is the largest. The second one will be num2 is the largest, and the third one will be num3 is the largest. out of all of these three, in the first assumption that we make is we say num1 is the largest, and the second one we will say num2 is the largest, and then the third one we will say num3 is the largest. So how can we assume this? For example, if I say num1 is the largest, that means num1 will always be greater than num2 and num3. So at the same time, num1 should be greater than num2 and num3. For example, if this value was, instead of 1, it was 10. In that case, 10 will always be greater than 3, and it will always be greater than, 10 will always be greater than 2 and 3 at the same time. So to translate that into code, it would look something like this. If num1 is greater than num2 and num1 is also greater than num3. This means if this condition gives you true, that means num1 is the greatest value among the three. Now once you figure out, or once you assume that num1 is the largest one, the next check you need to do is between num2 and num3, because we need to find which one is the second largest. So to do that, we will write if num2 is greater than num3, that would mean num2, for example, if this condition gives you true, that would mean the value that is stored in num2 is greater than the value that is stored in num3. Okay, so in that case, the print order that you will have is num1 is the largest, then you have num2, and then you have num3, because num1 is always greater than num2 and num3, and here we found out that num2 is also greater than num3. So num1 is the largest one, then there's num2, and then num3. But if this was false, then all you do is just swap the order. So the same thing, but the second largest becomes num3 and the smallest becomes num2. Now I need to print these, so I will use the print method, and I will send the values in the same order. So num1 is the first one, num2, and then num3, and then here it will be print num1, num3, and then num2. Okay, one second. One mistake that I've made, it's always greater than or equal to, that you need to write it here, because there could be two numbers that are the same. So always you need to write it with greater than or equal to. Now this was our assumption when num1 is the largest one. The same thing you do for num2. So if num2 is the largest, that means num2 should be greater than num1, and it should also be greater than num3 at the same time. And if that is true, then we need to find out between num1 and num3 which one is the greater one. If num1 was the greater one, then the print order would be num2, which is what we assumed is the largest. The second largest is num1, and then finally num3. And then if this was false, then we would just swap the order, num3 and num1. This is when we assumed it for num2 being the largest one. And then the last thing is, okay, one mistake that I've made here, we need to write else. If this match was found, we don't want it to continue checking anything else. If you don't write else, what happens is it checks this, and if this was true and you found a result from here, fine, but because there is no else, it will still go through this one. So in order for the program to skip the remaining options, if you found a match, in that case you need to write else. So else if num2 is greater than num1, all of that. And then finally the same thing you need to do for num3. So if num3 is the largest, then num3 should be greater than 1, and at the same time it should also be greater than, again I'm forgetting the equal to everywhere, don't forget the equal to, okay. All right, so num3 should be greater than or equal to num1, and num3 should also be greater than or equal to num2 at the same time. And then you need to check between num1 and num2 which one is the greater one, and then print it in that specific order. So this is num3, this is num1, and this is num2. Otherwise, print it in the other order, num3, num2, and then num1. And let's see if this works. And yes, it does. Now, I don't know if you noticed this, but this is a pattern that I remember for myself, or I try to remind myself every single time. When we assume num1 is the greater one, the print order in the print order, the first one will always be num1, right? And the second one will depend on this condition. So if num2 is greater, then you will have num2 and then num3. Otherwise, you just swap these two. So for example, in the next one, instead of 2 and 3 here, it's 3 and 2. The same thing for the next one. In the print, we're assuming num2 is the largest, so both the prints have num2. But then this ones depend on this condition. So if num1 was greater than or equal to num3, then you will print num1 and then num3. Otherwise, just swap them, 3 and 1. And similarly here, we're assuming num3 is the largest, so print num3 and then just depending on the condition, swap it. So if num1 is the greater one, you will print num1 and then num2. Otherwise, just swap them. Yeah, that's it for this question. And don't forget the equal to. This is my thing. Whenever I do this question, I always forget the equal to symbol. Okay, so that is done. Again, very important question. That this kind of question will show up in your exam. This concept will be there in the exam, including this one, the third question. The concept will be there in the exam. Okay, here you need to write a method which is called print. Oh, sorry, this is from the previous attempt. Okay, write a method called print reversed order that takes a 3-digit number as a parameter and then proceeds to print the number with its digits reversed. You can use the modulus operator. You need to validate if the input has 3 digits. So the thing that you need to do here is you're given a 3-digit number. First of all, you need to verify if it is a 3-digit number. If it is, then you need to reverse it. So for example, 381 should be written as 183. Now, the first thing you should do is always validate. If you need to do any validation, that should be your first thing that you write in code. So if you think about it, for a number to be a 3-digit number, the smallest 3-digit number is 100. And the largest 3-digit number is 999. Anything below 100 is not a 3-digit number, and anything above 999 is not a 3-digit number either. So how can we write this in code? So we can say if input is, let's say, greater than or equal to 100, and input is also less than or equal to 999, then it is 3-digit. Okay, otherwise it is not 3-digit. It is any other digit. Could be 4-digit, could be 5, could be whatever. So here you need to print incorrect input. So system.out.println incorrect input. And if it is a 3-digit number, you need to print it in its reversed order. Okay, now how to do that? Now this condition, before I continue. Now, this condition could have been written in a different way. You could have also said if input is less than 100, or it is greater than 999. In this case, you will then print the error. We're saying if the number is less than 100, which is 99, 98, whatever, or if it is greater than 999, which is 1000 or whatever. In that case, you can print the error. The reason I showed this to you is for you to know that the same question can be written in multiple ways. As long as it is working, as long as you get the correct output, that is what we want. But don't just memorize the code this way. Try to think of different ways of writing code so that it becomes easier for you to, do new questions, let's say for other labs or exams. Anyway, so this is the statement to check if it is a 3-digit number. Now, if it was a 3-digit number, you need to reverse it, right? How do we reverse it? Before we do that, if you look at this number, and if you remember math, every digit has a name, right? We say that this is the ones place, this is the tens place, and this one is the hundreds place, the 3, right? If there was another one, then there's a thousands place, and so on and so forth. Now, in order to change it, or in order to print it in a reversed order, you need to break it at every digit. So you need to get the digit at the ones place, the tens place, and then the hundreds place, and then print them individually. How can we do that? There's a trick that you can use with modulus operator, and I will show it to you by printing it here. For example, system.out.println. If I print this within the print statement, input modulus 10. Okay, if I just write input modulus 10 and click on pre-check, what will it give me? For the number 381, it gave me 1. But if it for the number 12, it gave me incorrect input, which is correct. But for 381, which is a 3-digit number, it gave me 1. Okay. Now, the same statement, if I copy this and I write it this way, the same thing, but just before the modulus, I divide the number by 10. And then I click on pre-check again. Then here I get 8, which is on the tens place, if you remember. This is the ones place. The number 1 is on the ones place, number 8 is on the tens place, and number 3 is on the hundreds place. So for the third number, all I have to do is add another 0, and I will get the 3 there. Okay. If it was a 4-digit number, what would I do? I would do the same thing, but with another 0. And if this was a 4-digit number, it would give me that number, the thousands place. This is something that you might want to remember. It's math. I don't know how many of you will understand it, but what is happening is you're dividing the number by 10 by whatever place you want, and then you're getting the remainder that is left when you divide it by 10. Sorry. The only thing that's different here is in the ones place digit, which is, let's assume this one. For that, you don't divide it by anything because it's like this, because it's the ones place, right? Any number divided by 1 is the same number. So you can just write it without that dividing by 1. Now just remember it this way. If you want the tens place number, take the number divided by 10 and then put modulus 10. If you want the hundreds place number, take the number divided by 100 modulus 10. If you want the 1000, take the number divided by 1000 and modulus 10. Now I will store these in different variables. Int, let's call this ones is equal to input modulus 10. This one is tens is equal to this, and then this one is the hundredths place. Okay, now all you have to do is print it like they've mentioned here. So copy that, remove this, paste it. This should be the number that they gave you, so input, and then this one, remove it. Just make sure that there's a dot at the end because it's mentioned here. Okay, double quotes, plus plus, ones, plus tens, plus hundreds. Okay, now if you check this, it should work. Okay, this trick is very important. If you want to memorize it because I know some students may not be good at math, but it is important for the questions where you need to break the string or reverse it or whatever. Okay, that is done. Now write a method get decade born, which is already given to you. It takes one parameter, the year that the user was born. Now here they didn't tell you what is the type, but if it's a year, it's basically a number, so you can just assume it to be integer. It will print the decade the user was born in. Hint, for this version you can use the int type parameter and the modulus operator. Okay, they mentioned the int type parameter. Okay, note that the code runner tests now needs to no input from the user, but okay, okay, so here you're given two numbers, which is basically the year that the user was born in. What you have to do is print the decade of the century that they were born in. Now how to get that? You get the number that is on the tens place, okay, and you add 1 to it. So this is 8, right? It becomes the 9th decade because we added 1 to 8, that made it 9. If it was 7, it will be 8th. If it was 6, it will be 7th. Okay, now we just saw how to break a number, right? So for example, here let's write int, you have here already, I'll call it digit, is equal to, first of all we need the 10, this is the ones place, and then this one, the one that we need is on the 10th place, so divided by 10 modulus 10. Okay, and then you need to print you were born in that decade, so system.out.println you were born in digit plus 1. So whatever this number is, add 1 to it, and that's the century that the user was born in. This feels illegal. I don't think the code is this short. Maybe I'm missing something. Let's see. Okay, it works. So you get the, what is it called, the number, you get the tens place by using the same method, just add 1 to it and you get the decade. Okay, now the next one, write a method, name of the method is this, that tests if a string contains small letter x or capital letter X on either side of the string, which is the first letter or the last letter. Store the result in a Boolean called has_char. Make sure that the string text passed has at least one letter so that the method does not crash, otherwise return false. Okay, if you notice, there is a return type now in the method which is called Boolean, which is Boolean here in this case. That means you need to either return true or false from this method. The name of the method is this, and you're also given a parameter which is text. Now you need to return has_char, so that means you need to declare it also, has_char. How did I know I should write Boolean? Because I'm returning has_char, and here whatever you have, whatever you write in the return, the data type of that is mentioned here. So here it's Boolean, that's why here I've written Boolean. By default, every Boolean should have false or can have false, whatever you want to give it, whatever value. Then you have that variable. Now, what you need to do is figure out in this string, is there small letter x in the beginning or at the end, or is there a capital letter X in the beginning or the end? So how can we test that? First of all, we need to make sure that you have some text in the string object. For that, you can take something called the length. So text.length will give you the length of the string. So for example, if there's 3 characters in the string, you will get 3. I can store that value in length, okay? And then I can say if length is equal to 0. That means, is there 0? Is it 0? I mean, is the, what is it called? If it is 0, that means that there are no characters. I'm sorry, I'm so zoned out for a minute, but anyway, so here you have length, which we're saying is it equal to 0, just to make sure that we have some text. If length was 0, then that means there are no characters in the string, it's empty, right? So in this case, what you need to do is you need to set has car to false, because they said it should have at least one letter, otherwise you should return false. So I'll just store false, and at the end it will return that value for me. But if the length was not 0, then in that case, what do we need to do? We need to check if there is x in the beginning of the string. There's a method that you can use for this. You can say if text dot car at 0, if it is the same as, now car is always written in single characters, single quotes. Is it small letter x or is it capital letter X? Is, now we're checking for the first character, okay? First character. So first character is always present on the 0 index. We're saying, is the character in text on the 0 index small letter x, or is it capital letter X? If either of this was true, please set has car to true. Okay. Then we're also checking else if you, okay, now this one here we checked for the first character. We also need to check for the last character, and the last character will always be present at length -1, because length is the human count, and the index always starts at 0. If you remember this, we've discussed this in class. So here it would be text dot car at length -1 is equal to small x, or text dot car at length -1 equal to capital X. If either one of them is true, has car will be true. Otherwise, finally, else has, you can omit else here, but if you want to write it, that's fine as well. Has car should be false. Okay, so if it is empty, false. If the first character has small letter x or capital letter X, make it true. If the last character has small letter x or capital letter X, make it true. Otherwise, finally make it false, and then return whatever the value of has car it has car is. If it's true, it will return true. If it's false, it will return false. Okay, so that's correct. Now write a method is x odd. The method is already written. To check whether a given integer is odd. If you remember this from class, I said this is very important. It is on one of the slides as well. Name the parameter of this method x. The result of the check should be a logical value assigned to a variable is x odd. So if you remember, the condition to check if a variable is odd or even, we said if you take that variable, use the modulus operator with 2. If you get 1, it will be, if the value is always 1, it is odd. If the value is 0, it is even. This is something you should remember. And you can check this. If you divide any odd number by 2, the remainder will always be 1. If you divide any odd number by, any even number by 2, the remainder is always 0. Now, this condition itself returns true or false, which is a Boolean, right? So what you can do is, what they want you to do here is they want you to create a Boolean, the same name as the method, okay, which is x odd is equal to all of this. Okay, it will evaluate all of this. If it's true or false, it will store it here. Okay, why is it true or false? Because of the equality operator. It will either give it true or false. And then finally, return is x odd. I don't understand the purpose of this one, but let's see. Okay, the semicolon is missing. This is for, if you write this, it will check if it is even. We need to know, or we need to check if it's odd. So the number should be 1 at the end. Okay. Now this, everything is correct except for this one, which is -3, because here it will give you -1, and we're saying it should be 1. So what you can do is either change this whole thing to not equal to 0, because if it is 0, then it's even, and if it's any other number other than 0, it's odd. Or you can keep it this way if it's easier for you to remember, but then just use math.absolute. What this does is, whatever the value of x, if the value of x is negative, it will change it into a positive value, and then you will always get 1 if it's an odd number. Okay, either way, whatever you prefer, whatever is easy for you to remember, use that. Okay, and then finally, write a method which is within, to check whether a given number is a value in the closed interval. Closed interval means that these two numbers are inclusive. Your job is to check if the value that is provided to you is any value between -10 and 0, including -10 and 0. Okay, the result should be a logical value the same way. You need to assign it to a Boolean and return the Boolean. So the method is given to you, and you need to create Boolean is within, which is the same name as the method, and check if the value x, which is provided as the parameter, is between these two numbers. So that means x should be greater than or equal to -10, and at the same time it should be less than or equal to 0. This is the whole condition. You can put it in brackets also. We're saying it should be either greater than -10, which is -9, -8, -7, whatever, and at the same time it should be less than or equal to 0. The reason we write and is because both the conditions matter. Okay, because if here, for example, here, let's say we're saying x should be less than or equal to 0, but minus 100 is also less than 0, right? So we need to limit the other side as well. Anyway, check. Oh, we didn't return anything. We need to return. No, not return, sorry. We need to print it. I think. Where does it say? Anyway, I think you need to print the value. So system.out.println is within. Check. And now it's fine. Okay. So that's it for this lab. It is very important. I'll tell you which questions are important. The last, okay, this concept is important. This one is important. This one is extremely important. Like I said, this concept you need to know. See, the questions will not be the same as your lab, but the concept will be the same. You have to use the same concept, but in a different situation. So you need to know these concepts, like how do you break a string, how do you reverse it, sorry, how do you break a number, how do you reverse it, or here, how do you sort them in a specific order. So these are important. So I would say the question 2, 3, 4 also, and 5. From here, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are very, very, very important. And aside from that, you should know how to write a method, because like I said, 3 questions out of your exam need to be written as a method. And if you don't know that, you've lost 15 marks out of 30 right there. Okay. So I think that's it. If you have any questions, let me know. Do practice the practice exam. I will show it to you. It's available here. This is a crossword that I have as well, which you can go through. It has all the important terms you need to know from unit 1 to, I think unit 5 is also included here, but in your exam unit 5 is not included. So from unit 1 to 4, all the terms that are important are available here, and the same definitions are present in your slides. I've taken all of this from the slide, so if you don't know the answer, you can look it up in any of the 4 units that are available. And then this is the practice midterm exam. Only 49 attempts. I don't know how many students out of 800 have done this. 49 attempts, and some of them are students who have repeated their attempt. This is exactly like your exam in terms of the structure. You will have your exam for 75 minutes, and you will have a certain number of theory questions, a certain number of coding questions, a certain number of flowchart questions. All of this is put together for you, and in this practice exam you have everything from the labs, summary quizzes, slides shown to you. If you practice this, it will be very easy for you to do the midterm. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. So anyway, all the very best. Let me know if you have any questions, and you will know about your midterm exam very soon, within next few days. Okay, take care. See you next time.